All right, I'm going to call this meeting of the IFEDA to order. City Administrator, please note the attendance with everybody here. First item on the agenda is the approval of minutes from the IFEDA meeting of July 20th, 2020.
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Droba. I have a second.
Second.
Whoa, there's a tie.
Go ahead.
I'll give it to Commissioner Briggs since this is his last IFEDA meeting. I mean, he wasn't at that one.
Maybe.
Better. Any discussion on the minutes? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, next piece is payment of claims. I'm going to hand that over to the City Administrator because he's way smarter than I am.
I wouldn't say that. Thank you, though. Just briefly, we don't have any claims, so there's nothing to address with claims for this quarter.
Thank you. September 20th financial reports from the multimodal district. Anything to report there?
No, Mr. President, we just have a copy of the balance sheet and financials for both the multimodal district, which is Fund 404, and then also for the EDA fund, which is Fund 208. And it just shows our assets and liabilities and activity, which is relatively minor and non-existent, just given that we haven't been active with our EDA.
Well, I think it's time to change that. Thank you. Do we have any reports from any commissioners? No? All right, so we're going to jump into the Director's Secretary report. So, A, discuss the 2021 budget and use of IFEDA funds for the RRCC Healthcare Initiative as a Skilled Jobs Training and Economic Development Program. Okay, so as we just heard the City Administrator note that we have no claims, we're sitting on, conservatively, about $228,000 between the cash in the bank and the Bremer Bank. Is that correct? I realize that we're at 408, but 180 of that is tied up in, I believe, the fire truck and some other things.
Right, that's a receivable that we don't have on.
But there's $228,000 sitting in our IFEDA account right now. So my question to you commissioners is this. Is there any reason that we couldn't pay the RRCC Healthcare Initiative that's on the books this year to come out of the city's general fund? Is there any reason, since it is an economic driver, that we could not pay it out of the IFEDA and take that $20,000 and move it forward or do something different with it? And then on top of that, it'll be two separate motions. But then we had Brad and Carrie in here. Is there any reason that we're sitting on $228,000 that we couldn't spend an additional $20,000 for the 2021 budget and take it out of the EDA? It's an economic program. We've got nobody coming and asking us for money. There's $228,000 that's doing nothing sitting there. I see no reason why we couldn't pay it this year out of our fund and then set it up for next year on next year's budget.
That's what it should come out to start with.
I think so too. I mean, and this is an open discussion. So I mean, if there's anything, the more I thought about what Brad was saying and what Carrie was saying, and then as I looked at this, knowing we had a meeting today, that's why I put it on the agenda. I feel like this year's contribution, which we have yet to pay, that is on our budget, should come out of this fund. Transfer it, take it out of this fund, and that frees up $20,000 in this year's budget to carry forward or do whatever. And we're already banking next year on, I'm talking the city's budget, we're already banking on pulling out of reserves. So this could maybe put some money back into reserves. I know it's left hand, right hand, but it's still there. And then next year, fund it. Let them know, hey, we're funding it. And then they don't have to worry about it. It's taken care of, and then we're not putting it on our levy or anything. It can just come right out of here. Mr. Mayor, you got a look on your face.
I'm just thinking, I'm 100% in agreement for you with if the funds are available in the IFEDA to be able to transfer that to the college for the economic development piece of it. If that satisfies the city's the city's piece, I guess I would agree with that wholeheartedly. My other concern is, doing it in the future. I'm not one of those people that actually believe in precedent or anything like that, and I'm trying to get away from organizations just coming to the city for funding, and I think if we committed to them 20,000, this is the right place to take it out of. I agree with that wholeheartedly. I guess I have concerns that we were looking at our budget and we couldn't come up with funding for next year, but maybe we can the next year. But I don't want to set a precedent, and one of the things that you had just said is nobody's coming here asking for money. I don't believe I'm scared that if we're starting to be able to lower the amount of monies that we're giving out for good causes in our community, whether it's economic development or the chamber. I mean, historically, I believe that this is the fund that the chamber was taken out of. Is that accurate?
No.
Okay. But there was a fund that the chamber was taken out of every year, and it became one of those things that, well, the money's there, that's ours.
It's a timber fund.
And fair enough. And that's the concern I have, is setting the precedent of, we have an account where people can take money out of. And I agree with your point on taking the money out this year. If that makes sense financially from the city administrator, I would agree with that, but I guess I have concerns long-term. I think it should be every year they come and ask if we have money available or be able to pitch. I'm just scared that if you do it one time, then next year it's going to be more of a, especially if we're earmarking it. So that's my concern.
Can I note
It's your
that?
conversation.
Okay, can I note that they did? So this, the 2020 was already budgeted in the city's budget.
Yep.
So that's through the pipe already. The point is that they were here and they did ask, and instead of putting it on the 2021 budget for the city, my proposal would be, and this will be two separate motions, my proposal would be to take it out of this fund to fund that project for next year, because the 2020, all we're doing is just paying it out of this, but the 2021, Carrie and Brad were here at the committee of the whole meeting last Monday and asked for 2021. So I see what you're saying, but I don't feel that it's necessarily, they did ask for it. So I don't feel that it's a they're not asking and we should have them ask, because they did. It's just, I'm saying that the money is here to pay the 2020, and maybe we don't, I mean, we already budgeted for it, but I just thought, if the money's here, I mean, I've been the president of this now for a year, and I don't think the only thing we've ever spent money on this is the fire truck. Since I've been on the city council, and I got on in September of 2019. So, or 2018, whatever it was. So I just felt like maybe since they were here and did ask, and it's up for debate in the committee of the whole meeting as we do a budget meeting, maybe we could have the debate here and make the decision, and if we decide yes, we can take it out of here, because they did ask.
I agree.
So does that make sense? I'm not trying to be a jerk about it, but that's the, again, it's an open conversation.
Yeah, and I think too, the way they were discussing within a few years, there's going to be some restructuring there that's going to make a lot of changes, I think, once they all merge together and turn into one college. It's going to make a big difference in how they restructure and stuff like that. So, I mean, right now, they're just at the infant stage of doing that, but still, it sounds like within a couple of years, there's going to be something else in play there, totally.
Just handle it year by year,
Right.
depending on how this fund goes and everything else.
Right, and I do have to preface this with, I do have some firsthand experience with this program. These nurses intern under me, so I see them, I know them, I see the numbers growing. I mean, they've interned with us for the last 4 years. I see the numbers growing, I see who they are, I see what's going on. It's a really good program, and really this year with COVID, everybody is struggling. The state just did an RFP to bring in nurses from other areas if they so chose, and the state was going to pay their wages to get some vacation stuff taken care of. So I guess I did talk to the city administrator about it, that's why it's here. I guess I'd be comfortable with the two motions, maybe one for the 2020 and then we can talk about the 2021 or see what we want to do, but again, they were here.
I would make the motion to pay the 2020 $20,000 out of the IFEDA.
So I have a motion by Commissioner Droba.
I'll second.
I have a second by Commissioner Buller. Any additional discussion on that?
I'd like to make a couple
Oh,
comments.
absolutely.
So, just for a little bit of background, part of the reason why our EDA is relatively inactive is that that's been by design. I think past councils, particularly Mayor Anderson, was interested in having KEDA be the lead organization and really manage economic development projects in Cooch County, including the city of International Falls. So our EDA was relegated, in my terms, to being a financial conduit to try and continue to manage the lease that we have with the Voyageurs National Park, and then to accumulate a fund balance so that if there are economic development projects in our city that we need to fund, we've got some tools as a resource to assist those businesses. And so we have a surplus balance in another fund for our commercial loan program, and it's roughly $150,000. It's in our financial statements. So we've been using that up to about just $1 short of $25,000. But this would be for a more sizable project that's going to generate, meet some public purposes, generate jobs, increase the tax base, and try and be if nothing else, some kind of a gap financing within the confines of a project that we can engage with somebody that wants to do something and meet some public purposes. So that, I think, is what, from a staff standpoint, or from my perspective, what these monies are there for. We really only levy $5,000 a year. We identify about $750, I think, in admin expenses and about $4,200 for legal expenses or professional services expenses if we need to do something. So that's a bit of the history on it. I will also say that when the council went forward with this at the very beginning, I almost literally arm wrestled with the auditors about whether or not this was a valid expenditure on the part of the city to make, because the state policy and the statutes are that cities need to have the statutory authority or authority through your charter to make certain expenditures for a public purpose. If you don't have that, you don't have a valid expenditure to be made. And the auditors were very concerned about this, and I had several pieces of correspondence with them, and I argued the point that the EDA was making and the city council was making at the time, is that this is an economic development initiative, and cities have the right to have economic development programs. They said it was a training program. We had a lot of vacant positions in nursing and other skilled care facilities, and so we were trying to jumpstart that, to try and get the people trained to meet needed jobs and use that approach. So they finally relented, and we, I haven't heard anything from the state or anybody else, but I did have to wrestle with them a bit to try and get them to back off and say that this was a valid expenditure. I did do some research after you and I had spoke. I still see, it's a gray area, but this is an economic development agency, and I just want to make the point, or make that history available to some of you that haven't heard it before, and also make you aware of the fact that it's easy to see a pot of money that you don't have designated for anybody else and then just spend it, and then what do you do to try and rebuild it? And $20,000 is not going to break this bank. So I just wanted to make those points. And then finally, I do want the council to be cognizant, we did have we had a positive fund balance at the end of 2019. Without looking closely at it, I expect the same to happen in 2020, primarily because we have all this CARES monies, this infusion of $462,000. Now, we've made a lot of expenditures for things that were unbudgeted, but some of it is going to offset some of our expenses and personnel costs. So how that impacts the end of the year financial statement, I'm not sure. I haven't done that analysis, but I expect that some money that we had budgeted is not going to be spent because we've been able to infuse some of the CARES funding into some of our personnel costs, if nothing else. So the $20,000 will improve that picture for the city's year-end budget, but, the EDA budget is going to be down 20,000 additionally. So just some conversation points that I just wanted to make the board aware of before you vote.
Anything for, I guess, again, I just kind of, to be honest with you, I saw it as an opportunity to do something, to make it, these meetings, to do something. Again, it's been, you were on the council the last time we spent any money. We bought that truck. So, not that that sticks in my craw or anything, but it's just, it seems to be like the last thing that we did. So, I just thought it was a good opportunity to maybe help out the program, help out the city, and we do have a dire nurse shortage. And again,
Very much so.
I get to see them, and I have a personal relationship with them. They all take some intern hours with me.
I deal with the shortage being on the hospital board, so.
Sure. So I guess, so the motion in the second is for the 20,000 for this year. Is there any further discussion? Call to question. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carries. And then, do we want to talk about, and then open discussion, do we want to talk about next year? We don't have to. I just know that they had come and asked us. I don't know how we want to play
I would
that.
like to just, we'll talk about it next, you guys talk about it next year.
Okay.
You're gonna be left with about 180, but hearing what the mayor is saying about some other things happening,
Sure.
I think that's a good pot of money to be able to hopefully welcome some other businesses to the community and jumpstart them, possibly. That would be a great opportunity to use that 180 that's left, because those could be some sizable projects, and I think that we need to be more welcoming and more helpful with these businesses if we're gonna move forward, especially when Mayor says with what's happening in the big cities and people, this is a great place to live. We gotta make it welcoming for them.
Yeah, it'll be about 208 that we'll have to use. So no, I agree with that. I like that idea.
And I know this is just a little bit off subject, but this is such a good meeting because we don't have a ton of people at it. One of the things that I think kind of got Mayor Anderson to where he was to try to build up this finances is because every year we were funding the economic development position, and I don't want to go back on where we were there, but once that ended, we ended up having nothing left because it was what monies we were getting from the Voyageurs National Park lease, but then when we had to put more money in maintenance, there wasn't money there. So what we would have had to have did is levy to pay the economic director, and that's kind of how we got into the history of the EDA and why we don't have monies in this. Well, in that time frame, Brian and I got to go down to a meeting where it was like a matchmaker for businesses to come to your community. What business works, what doesn't, and there was a company called Timber Block, and we sat down with those guys, and every single thing that they needed in a community we had except for one.
A 4-lane road.
We didn't have a 4-lane road that came to International Falls, and they needed train, they needed an airport, they needed timber, and we met everything that they possibly needed except for the 4-lane road. So when we got to talking to them, everything worked out. Everything sounded perfect. It was a matchmate because they wanted to build a new place. They needed land, but they were going to build their own thing. But you'll never guess what it really came down to. It came down to money. Do you have the facility, the thing to help us out? Well, we have no money. The only thing we have is land to try to get people to come in. I don't know any municipality or county that doesn't have land. So we need to have something that puts us above and beyond. And I love the fact that we now actually have some monies in there, but I think we have to be really diligent on what we use that money for. I mean, it has to be a project with a developer's agreement, and we're putting in money in the public partnership. You know, we're on the cusp of something great, but we have to, well, but if we don't have nurses, I guess that's an issue too, but it just seems like we're really in good position for in the future being able to fund projects as they come in. But now we can go back to some of those things and say, hey, this is what we have now, and we can offset by $50,000 or something, you know, just that gap funding to be able to. So anyways, that was just kind of off topic, but I think it makes sense to what Brian said, is we should hold this money, and as it comes up, to have those conversations.
And just one other, to piggyback on that, what is the, so by refinancing the bond on Voyageurs National Park, I think we are able to put a little more money in here, right?
Well, our debt service obligations will be less, and so there should be excess money. Now, we have money, it's a convoluted, not a convoluted, it's just...
It is. You can say it. It's
There's
okay.
7
Safe
different
space, Ken.
places that money goes to. There's a bond reserve fund, there's an operating reserve fund, a replacement reserve fund, there's some money that's channeled into the city maintenance fund, which increases with cost of living. And right now, because the project is relatively new still, we haven't been investing a lot of money in those things. But I actually really appreciate the vision and the position that the city took to make sure that we had those reserve funds, because at some point, you're going to have to be putting siding, new doors, windows, roofing, and that stuff isn't cheap, especially for a building of that nature. So it's good that we have those reserve funds, and I think that's really important for our community. And, you know, we struggle, you can see, everybody, especially at KEDA, you know how we struggle to try and get somebody that's bringing 6 jobs in. I think they got 23 or 26 full-time jobs out there, not to mention the seasonal ones. So, I mean, that's a value-added benefit to our community. They're good-paying jobs with benefits. So I think it's important that we have that project, and we should be, you know, I met with Brad a little bit last week. Like I said, there's a number of different funds that money goes into. Some of it is directed to the debt service fund, and we'll just pay off the debt sooner, which means that we don't have that obligation any longer, too. So, but some of the money can go to this fund.
So we won't act on 2021, but we did act on the 2020. And we can always act on 2021 later, because as we found out, they don't usually need it till December anyway, so we do have some time. So maybe that's something we could look at.
Well, and one of the other things that Brad had said is even if we put it into our 2022 budget, giving it to them in January would meet the requirements for that year.
Sure. So that's something we can look at, maybe see where this fund is at come the end of next year. So this meeting next year, so 1 year from now, that September, we'll take a look at it and see where we're at. So is everybody okay with that? All right, so we will move on to item B, so project updates. 22nd Street BDPI grant, Granite Digital Cobblestone Hotel. Want to throw it back to you, Ken?
Well, it's just a few updates, just for conversation. You know, the 22nd Street project, we were fortunate to get that grant from the state. They're still looking for us to make comments on the draft grant agreement. I haven't sent it back to them because they were very careful to point out that the easements that we have in there have to be described appropriately so that it doesn't create title issues or, well, issues down the road. So I'm still waiting. Now that the final plat's been approved, I think we can move forward with that. I did want to comment that, you know, Ted and I have been talking, and we're hoping to get some of the utility work done this year. And we are starting the work, and I was out today, Pleasant Avenue, the work's being done. As you know, that contract's been let, but we haven't let the work out for the utility work and the road improvements that have to happen on 22nd. So we'll be moving forward with that. And we haven't got the Mylars to sign the plats yet. So I've communicated with Paul Nevenin as the client for KEDA to have Arrow of the North prepare those so that we can sign them and get them recorded, and we still haven't received them, so, and that's been some time, so I'm gonna be rattling that cage a little bit to see where that is and get them signed. And I believe they need to be signed by the mayor, and I might also need to sign off on them, so. So that's where that's at, and then Granite Digital, we talked about that a little bit earlier, I don't know if has anybody else want to add anything to that, they've acquired both lots fronting on 2nd Avenue East?
I believe they already had 2 lots, and now they were looking at a third for water drain off.
Which is it's a back lot, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have street access or anything. So, and they're gonna put a pond there for runoff.
Was it on the north side of the property, or?
I don't know the answer to that.
We sold it for $1,000.
Because I've had conversations with Paul about that and about where that project is, and I said, one of the things that's gonna happen to actually make the project go forward is you really have to have a wetland delineation. And I said, you need to get somebody out there yesterday because they won't do it when there's vegetation off the leaves and you start to get the ground frozen. So they gotta look at topography, soil conditions, vegetation, and if the vegetation's off, they won't be able to do it again until late May or June.
Well, and with that being said, in the developer's agreement that they have, I asked the specific question today. They have to start building before the fall of 2021, or else it reverts back to KEDA.
Okay. Okay, good.
Anything on Cobblestone?
Well, we're still trying to move forward with them. As I said, the city's doing its share by upgrading the water main in Pleasant Avenue. I know that Paul had some meetings with them, and they're trying to, he's got the Entrepreneurial Fund, Northland Foundation, and then Paul and I had a roughly an hour-long conversation with our financial advisor, Tammy Amdahl at Northland Securities, about how we move forward with tax abatement to provide the assistance that they say they're going to have and need as part of that, that project. So we had a good background information, kind of a tutorial for Paul to understand exactly how abatement would fit in that, what's involved in the process. And it sounds like, again, that they want the city and the county to abate each of our share of property taxes for that project, to apply it to meet some of the gap. But there's a number of different sources right now, and it sounds like they've got preliminary approval from all the banks that they need. So we're waiting on an application for tax abatement, and then that will be acted on by the city council. The city council will have to hold a public hearing, and the county board will have to hold a public hearing, and I believe it's adopting a resolution to move forward with the abatement. So how Northland Securities, our advisor, will be involved is they're going to look at the development pro forma that's prepared by Cobblestone or anybody else that wants tax abatement, and then they're going to look at the assumptions that have been included in that development pro forma and make sure that they're representative of current market conditions, and in fact verify if there really is a financing gap that needs tax abatement. My hope all along was to use some of the abatement that would be generated there on our costs to do some of the work with the utilities in that area. However, I think one of the things that came up in our conversation is that there's a maximum of $200,000 per year, or a percentage of your estimated or net tax capacity, and I don't know what that number is, whichever is less. And so right now, we're generating about $55,000 a year in tax abatement for the riverfront project, so that really leaves $145,000 left to apply to this project or others. So, that's part of what will go into that analysis. So, I just want you to know that we're still looking at that. It seems real. I don't know how, I'm surprised anybody's looking at doing any projects right now because the lumber costs are so high.
If you can get it.
Yeah, and the availability is a problem
Tax
too.
abatement too.
Has it ever come up at KEDA about being able to use ARDC? Because ARDC is good.
And
That's out there, that's what got Green Tech going when they started here. And just, it's another funding site that's available, and I just never ever hear Paul Paul's on ARDC is trying to use those funds.
Yeah, Paul did, if I may, Mr. President, Paul did indicate that he's had Andy Hubley be involved, as well as the Entrepreneurial Fund and the other Northland company from the Duluth area. So they've got, he said, well, I've got multiple people looking at the financing gap, and that's where he was starting to get uncomfortable. He says, I'm a little out of my comfort zone, so that's why he wanted to talk to Tammy Amdahl, and she's going to help us do our financial analysis and then walk us through this. And we had a meeting, I think, as an EDA with her, talking about tax abatement and tax increment financing over a year ago, or about a year ago.
Hey, I just have a question, and I didn't want to say this in the city council meeting, but American has also got their funding in place, and as I understood it, American was looking at the Entrepreneur Fund and all of that stuff, and I understood Cobblestone had their funding in place through a traditional lender, and they had all of their funding in place. Is there a possibility that we were talking about both of those?
Paul and I, when we spoke, we talked about both of them. He was talking about those other funds.
Yeah.
I don't recall if they were directed specifically to American or Cobblestone. I know Cobblestone has been working with, everybody thinks pretty highly of the president of Cobblestone because he's been involved. He's done a lot of projects. He's used TIF, tax abatement.
Yeah.
And so he's been kind of leading the charge and needing the assistance. But for both of them, there's going to be some financial analysis, and there's been the discussion about tax abatement. I got an email from Paul this morning, and he was mentioning that they had a meeting the end of last week or the middle of last week, and there was, he just said, I'm not sure where we go from here from the meeting because there was some confusion on the part of the lenders. So they had a conference call with people, and there was a couple different banks involved, and there was some confusion on the bank's part as to how much they were going to provide. And so at one point, the gap was over $4 million, but I think there was some mistake in the numbers.
Okay.
So that's why it wasn't,
Well, because and maybe this isn't the right place. I just know that as Paul and I had discussed it, it sounded like Cobblestone was pretty well set on their finances, like everything seemed to be in place through Bremer, as I understood it.
Yep, Bremer was involved in that one.
But it
And they have
was,
approved from
okay,
what he conveyed to me.
but it was American on their new build that there was multiple lending arms that were involved in that one. And I think that, as I understand it, Cobblestone is really on the cusp of being able to pull this off. The other one, it seems like there's still some funding issues, but they have, again, as I understand it, they have purchased, or they have a purchase agreement for the property across from the clinics. So I just find it interesting on how close we are to a couple of these projects.
Which are really needed, and when people are traveling again, post-COVID, it'll be great to have them because they'll both be an asset to our community.
Right.
So I just wanted to have a conversation about that, and I guess to go to your point, Andy Hubley was one of the names that Paul mentioned. He's been involved in reviewing the project too, so.
Perfect.
Okay, that's it on those projects.
Back to 22nd. Are we set up so that when we do the blacktop, that we have an assessment policy that we can assess it then? Legally, or are we still waiting for that? I don't know.
Well, I think at the Public Works Committee is I guess Ted told me that you wanted to talk about the assessment policy on there. So the city doesn't have I guess, there's some people that think we have a policy and there's other people that say we don't. What I've seen for a policy is a one-page handwritten sheet of paper that goes back a long time, written up by Gary Skalman, and it's, and I provided in May, I think it was, or April, a longer one that I had drafted for another community that you guys wanted to review, and it really hasn't gone anywhere. But I think that project we were proposing to assess and we're proposing to assess roughly half the cost based on the policy that we've done in the past. So to make it not simple, the city's policy is that we assess 15 feet on either side of the center line of the road. If there's any road width beyond that, the city pays. The city pays for all the street stabilization, and the city pays for the storm sewer. The private property owners would pay for curb and gutter if that's part of the project, as well as that center 15 feet. So in essence, as Gary explained it, the city ends up paying for 40%. And I think the issue is, the concern that I have, is that on these projects where the adjacent properties are benefiting 100%, we should assess it initially 100%, because they're benefiting, and that frees up money for us to spend on other projects that we have to do in the way of either doing reconstruction or reclaiming on our existing infrastructure, because there is a limited amount of these sales tax monies that are coming in, and let's make the best use of it. But it is contrary to what we've done in the past. We just haven't done a lot of that. And when you look at it, and I don't know if there's any initiative, but the problem is that we've done everything on a petition basis. So we could get 3 petitions in 1 year to upgrade a block or half a block with pavement, which we've done, and it's, we need to fund that up front, and then we get the money paid back in assessments over 3 to 5 years, but we still pay for 40% of it, and it's not anything budgeted or initiated by the city. It's not pre-planned. So we have a lot of gravel streets. The last city I was in, they went through a 10-year project where they paved every single gravel road they had in town. It was a 37 square mile city. But they used a 10-year program, and when they assessed it, they assessed 100%. Because they were new, all they had was gravel class 5 roads. But, you're kind of, and those projects can be initiated by the city council, or they can be initiated by petition, either way.
Very good.
So I guess the bottom line is I don't know that we have a formal assessment policy. I drafted one. Ted said it was too wordy, and I know that doesn't come as any surprise to most of you guys, but there's a lot of communities that have them, and we can tailor them to anything we want, and there's a lot of flexibility, but I see value in having a policy, because if it's contested at all, you've got a policy to fall back on, and you treat everybody the same, at least all the circumstances for the development the same.
Makes sense. Minnesota Power Grant transmission line.
I just put some information that was mailed to us from them. It's at the end of your packet. They were just thanking us and trying to remind what kinds of uses are permitted or not permitted in it. So this applies to us as we have some property that was, and I don't remember the acreage. It's west of here, and the overhead power lines, the new lines that went in, went through a corner of our property. So they had to get an easement from us, and so this is a letter as follow-up for that.
Okay, any other business? So Commissioner Briggs, I lied to you. I guess you're going to attend one more on Monday, December 21st. For some reason, I thought this would be the 4th and final, but I lied to you, so I apologize. I take that back. It's weird that they're only 2 months apart.
I thought they are 3 months. Yeah.
That's 2
I
months.
think you're right. I don't.
Well, we do them every
I don't-
quarter, so maybe that's supposed to be January, but
January, yeah, it should be,
But
January, March, July, and October, right?
part of the reason for having that on there though too is that, that's the date that the city council would adopt the final budget. So if there's anything that we want to do in amending our budget for
Sure.
next year, and it's one of the things, and I need to talk to staff about it a little bit. I have not done this in the past, but when we got $462,000 injected in CARES Act funds, and we spend it on things that have been unbudgeted, I might look at having a resolution adopted to actually amend this year's budget with all the changes that we've made and the additional funds that have been injected in our budget. And I'll probably talk to the auditors to see the value in doing that. But it's something that we would do prior to or at the Truth and Taxation meeting. Probably prior to that, actually, because that would be our final budget.
All right, Commissioner, you're getting one more.
Perfect.
So Any other business?
So I need another meeting.
We're adjourned.